The whispered challenge Vera. Thompson clutched her worn leather briefcase as she stepped through the gleaming glass doors of Meridian and Associates. At 23, she was the youngest intern the prestigious law firm had ever hired, and she felt every stare that followed her modest dress and sensible shoes. The marble floors clicked under her heels as she made her way to the elevator, trying to ignore the whispered comments from perfectly polished associates. "Third floor," she murmured to herself, checking the crumpled paper with her assignment. Details. The elevator hummed softly as it carried her up to what would become the most important day of her life. The legal department buzzed with controlled chaos. Paralegals rushed between offices carrying towers of documents, while senior associates barked orders into their phones. Vera found her assigned desk tucked into a corner near the copy machine, a space so small it barely accommodated her chair. "You must be the new intern," said a sharp voice behind her. Vera turned to see Diana Wells, the firm's senior executive, standing with arms crossed. Diana was everything Vera wasn't. Tall, immaculately dressed in a designer suit, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from years of wielding power. "I hope you're prepared to work harder than you ever have in your life." Vera straightened her shoulders. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready for anything." Diana's smile was cold as winter. "We'll see about that." She dropped a thick manila folder on Vera's desk. "The Hartwell Industries merger. Every document needs to be reviewed and summarized by tomorrow morning. Don't mess this up." As Diana walked away, Vera opened the folder and gasped. Hundreds of pages of complex legal documents stared back at her. She glanced around the office, noticing how other interns had received much lighter assignments. This wasn't just work, it was a test, and she was meant to fail. But Vera Thompson had never backed down from a challenge. She rolled up her sleeves and began reading. Hours passed in a blur of corporate jargon and legal clauses. Her eyes burned from the fluorescent lights and her back ached from hunching over the documents. The office gradually emptied as evening arrived, leaving her alone with the security guard and the hum of computers. It was nearly midnight when she found it. Buried deep in Section 47C of the acquisition agreement was a clause that made her blood run cold. The language was deliberately obscure, hidden behind technical terms and cross-references, but its meaning was crystal clear to anyone who knew how to read legal documents properly. Hartwell Industries wasn't just being acquired, they were being systematically stripped of their most valuable assets. The contract allowed Meridian's client, Blackstone Corporation, to transfer all of Hartwell's patents and intellectual property to a subsidiary company, leaving the original company as an empty shell. Thousands of Hartwell employees would lose their jobs, and the founding family would be left with nothing but worthless stock certificates. Vera's hands trembled as she reread the clause 3 times, hoping she was wrong. But she wasn't. This wasn't just a merger. It was corporate theft disguised as legitimate business. She thought about her own family. Her father, who had lost his job when his company was restructured by a larger corporation. Her mother, who still cleaned offices at night to make ends meet. The Hartwell family was about to face the same devastation, and they had no idea. The next morning, Vera arrived at the office early, her summary report completed and her mind made up. The conference room was packed with Meridian's top lawyers, all preparing for the final contract review before the signing ceremony. At the head of the table sat Jonathan Cross, the firm's managing partner and CEO. Jonathan was a man who commanded attention without trying. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and eyes sharp as a hawk's, he had built Meridian and Associates into one of the most powerful law firms in the country. His reputation was legendary, brilliant, ruthless, and completely dedicated to winning at any cost. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan's voice filled the room with quiet authority, "today we complete the largest acquisition in our firm's history. The Hartwell merger will generate $40 million in fees and establish us as the premier corporate law practice on the East Coast." Applause rippled through the room. Diana Wells beamed from her seat near Jonathan, clearly basking in the reflected glory of the deal she had orchestrated. "Are there any final questions or concerns before we proceed?" Jonathan asked, his gaze sweeping the room with practiced confidence. This was her moment. Vera's heart pounded as she raised her trembling hand. "Actually, sir, I found something troubling. In Section 47C." The room fell silent. Every face turned toward her with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. Diana's eyes narrowed dangerously. Jonathan's confident expression flickered for just an instant before settling back into professional calm. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "Vera Thompson, sir. I'm the intern assigned to review the Hartwell documents." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the sudden quiet. "This contract, it isn't fair." Diana stood abruptly. "Mr. Cross, I apologize for this interruption. Miss Thompson is new and obviously doesn't understand." "Let her speak," Jonathan said, his voice dropping several degrees in temperature, his eyes fixed on Vera with laser intensity. "What exactly do you think you found, Miss Thompson?" Vera opened her folder with shaking hands. "Section 47C contains a hidden asset transfer clause. Blackstone Corporation isn't just acquiring Hartwell Industries. They're systematically stripping away all valuable intellectual property and transferring it to a shell company. The Hartwell family will be left with an empty corporate structure while Blackstone takes everything of value." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jonathan's confident face was transforming, the practiced charm melting away to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "Those are very serious accusations, Miss Thompson," he said, each word carefully measured. "Are you suggesting that this firm, my firm, would knowingly participate in fraudulent activity?" Vera felt every eye in the room boring into her, but she pressed on. "I'm suggesting that maybe the Hartwell family should know what they're really signing before it's too late." Diana slammed her hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. She's an intern who's been here for exactly 1 day. Security should escort her out immediately." But Jonathan held up a hand, his gaze never leaving Vera's face. "Show me." With trembling fingers, Vera slid the relevant pages across the long conference table. Jonathan picked them up, his expression unreadable as he scanned the dense legal text. The room held its collective breath. Minutes ticked by in agonizing silence. Finally, Jonathan set the papers down and looked directly at Vera. What she saw in his eyes made her blood run cold, not surprise or concern, but calculation. He had known about the clause all along. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice now completely devoid of warmth, "I appreciate your thoroughness. However, you seem to have misunderstood the complex nature of corporate acquisitions. What you're describing is standard practice in the industry." "But the Hartwell family doesn't know," Vera whispered, her voice barely audible. "They think they're selling their company to someone who will preserve their father's legacy. They have no idea that—" "That's enough." Jonathan's words cut through the air like a blade. "Diana, please escort Miss Thompson to HR. I believe her internship has run its course." The room erupted in murmurs as Diana moved around the table toward Vera. But the young intern wasn't finished yet. "They have 3 children," Vera said, louder now, desperation making her bold. "The Hartwell family. I read about them in the company materials. 3 kids who grew up thinking they would inherit their grandfather's business someday. And there are 2,000 employees who have no idea they're about to lose their jobs. Doesn't that matter to anyone?" Jonathan stood slowly, his full height and presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "Miss Thompson, you have exactly 30 seconds to leave this building voluntarily, or I will have security remove you. Your choice." Vera gathered her papers, with as much dignity as she could muster. As Diana gripped her arm to escort her out, she turned back one final time. "This contract isn't fair," she whispered, but her words carried across the silent room like a bell tolling. "And someday, everyone will know it." Jonathan's confident face had turned completely cold, carved from stone and empty of any human warmth. "Get her out of my sight." As the conference room door closed behind her, Vera could hear the meeting resuming, voices discussing final details and signing schedules as if nothing had happened. But something had changed in that room, and everyone knew it. The innocent girl, who had walked in with a briefcase full of hope, was gone. In her place stood a young woman who had seen the true face of corporate power and refused to look away. The cold reckoning, 3 hours after being escorted from Meridian and Associates, Vera Thompson sat in a small coffee shop across the street staring at her phone. The business card in her other hand bore the name Robert Hartwell, President, Hartwell Industries, along with his direct phone number. She had found it tucked between the contract pages, a simple white card that represented a family's entire legacy. Her finger hovered over the call button as she wrestled with her conscience. Calling would destroy any chance she had of working in corporate law again. Jonathan Cross's influence reached every major firm in the city, but the faces of those 3 Hartwell children, smiling from the company website photos, wouldn't leave her mind. She dialed. "Mr. Hartwell? This is Vera Thompson from Meridian and Associates. I need to tell you something about your contract that you're signing today." Back at Meridian, the signing ceremony was in full swing. The Hartwell family had arrived in their best clothes. Robert Hartwell, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes, his wife Margaret, and their eldest son David, who was eager to see the family business continue under new ownership. They had no idea they were about to sign away everything their family had built over 3 generations. Jonathan Cross stood at the head of the conference table, every inch the successful attorney in his $1,000 suit. Diana Wells beside him, radiating satisfaction as she watched the family review the final documents. The Blackstone Corporation representatives sat smugly at the other end of the table, briefcases full of money ready to complete their corporate. "Raid, I trust everything is in order?" Jonathan asked, his voice smooth as silk. "We've structured this deal to ensure maximum benefit for all parties involved." Robert Hartwell smiled, his trust evident in every line of his weathered face. "You've been wonderful to work with, Mr. Cross. Our family couldn't ask for better. Representation." Jonathan's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. For just a moment, he thought about Vera Thompson's whispered words. Then he pushed the thought away. Business was business. "Excellent. If you would just sign here, here, and here." Jonathan indicated the signature lines with his gold pen. Robert reached for the pen, but his phone buzzed. He glanced at it with mild irritation. "I'm sorry, this will just take a moment." "Mr. Hartwell?" The voice on the other end was young, female, and trembling with nervous energy. "This is Vera Thompson. I worked at Meridian and Associates. I need to tell you about Section 47C of your contract." Robert's expression changed as he listened. His wife noticed immediately, reaching over to touch his arm with concern. "What do you mean, asset transfer clause?" Robert asked, loud enough for the entire room to hear. Jonathan's blood turned to ice. Across the table, Diana Wells had gone pale. "Someone outside is trying to interfere with our business," Jonathan said smoothly, moving toward Robert. "Perhaps you should put the phone away and—" "No." Robert's voice had changed completely, the trusting businessman replaced by the sharp executive who had built a company from nothing. "Miss Thompson, explain to me exactly what you found." For the next 10 minutes, Vera walked Robert Hartwell through every hidden clause, every obscure cross-reference, every piece of legal sleight of hand that would strip his company bare. The room listened in growing horror as the true nature of the deal became clear. When Robert finally hung up, the silence was deafening. "Mr. Cross," Robert said, his voice deadly quiet, "would you care to explain why your firm has conspired to defraud my family?" Jonathan's mask finally slipped completely. Gone was the charming attorney, replaced by a cold-eyed predator who had been caught in his trap. Robert, you need to understand that business today requires— I understand perfectly. Robert stood, his family flanking him. I understand that you sold us out to these vultures. He gestured toward the Blackstone representatives, who were already gathering their papers and heading for the exit. I understand that you would have let us sign away 3 generations of work without blinking an eye. Diana Wells tried to salvage the situation. Mr. Hartwell, if you just review the full context of the merger terms— The full context, Margaret Hartwell interrupted, her voice shaking with rage, is that you tried to steal everything from us while shaking our hands and taking our money. Jonathan straightened his tie, his face now completely emotionless. I'm afraid you've been misled by a disgruntled former employee. The terms of this contract are completely standard. Standard? David Hartwell, the son, stepped forward. Standard. To destroy 2,000 jobs? Standard to lie to families about their future? What kind of monsters are you people? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Jonathan looked around the room at faces filled with disgust and betrayal, and for the first time in his career, he had no answer. The Hartwell family left without another word, taking their signatures and their trust with them. The Blackstone representatives had already fled, their corporate raid exposed and worthless. Diana Wells stood frozen by the window, watching $40 million in fees disappear into the city afternoon. Sir, one of the junior associates whispered, what do we do now? Jonathan Cross, the man who had built an empire on the precise manipulation of legal language, found himself speechless. In 30 years of practice, he had never been outmaneuvered by anyone, let alone a 23-year-old intern with a worn briefcase and an inconvenient conscience. Find that girl, he said finally, his voice barely controlled fury. Find Vera Thompson and make sure she never works in this city again. But across the street, Vera was already gone. She had watched through the coffee shop window as the Hartwell family walked out of Meridian and Associates with their heads held high, their legacy intact. She had made powerful enemies today, but she had also done something more important. She had told the truth. As she walked away from the gleaming towers of the legal district, Vera Thompson smiled for the first time in days. Her career at Meridian was over before it had really begun, but she had learned something valuable about herself. When faced with a choice between comfort and conscience, she would choose conscience every time. And somewhere in the city, a family of strangers was going home to their children with good news instead of heartbreak, because one young woman had been brave enough to whisper the truth when it mattered most. The contract that was supposed to change everything had changed everything, just not the way Jonathan Cross had planned. Sometimes the smallest voice can topple the mightiest tower, and sometimes fairness wins, even when the odds seem impossible. But the real victory wasn't in the money saved or the jobs preserved. It was in the quiet knowledge that integrity still mattered, even in a world that often forgot its value. Vera Thompson walked into an uncertain future with nothing but her principles and her courage, and somehow that felt like everything she needed.